In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Please be seated. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. It's really good to be together in this place this morning. We are, if you turn to page 2 of your bulletin, you don't need to do it now, I'll just tell you what's there. It talks about the fact that we are in a season of stewardship. Now, it's really kind of funny to call it a season of stewardship because we really only spend about 3 weeks a year letting God challenge us in our pledging to God's church in the coming year. And so in a few weeks, you and I will sit over our pledge card, and we will, in that profound moment, we will fill it out and make a pledge to support the work of God's church, or at least this station of God's church. It is, for me, it is, in my family, it's an extraordinary moment every year. An extraordinary moment. An opportunity to really reflect on our life and faith and to wonder what God is calling us to do. And to wonder really out loud about whether or not we are being faithful stewards of all that God has entrusted to us in our lives. It was with all of that in mind that I was drawn to the reading from Genesis this past week. This is I think, an extraordinary text from the book of Genesis. It's a turning point in Jacob's life. Jacob, of course, is recognized as one of the great patriarchs of the Judeo-Christian story. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Of course, Jacob becomes Israel in this morning's text. But before he becomes Israel, the one who strives with God, which is what we do over the pledge card every year, before he becomes Israel, he is Jacob. And that name means, or sort of literally means, grabber. Jacob is the one who grabs. Jacob is a conniver. He is a deceiver. He is not, when you think about great patriarchs of the faith, he's not the image you first think of. Jacob does what Jacob does for Jacob throughout most of his story. In fact, when we get to this part of the story in Genesis this morning, he's probably now middle-aged. You remember Jacob. He is the one who stole his brother Esau's birthright. Remember? Remember how he stole, he's a trickster. He tricked Esau. It didn't really trick him. He bought him out, so to speak. You go back and read the text and you'll know what I'm talking about. But Jacob fools his brother, plots with his mother to deceive his father, and in so doing, he grabs his brother's birthright. And that's where the story of Jacob begins. And it really kind of goes downhill from there. Jacob will eventually have to leave home because he's on the outs. Surprise, surprise. He's on the outs with his family. And so he needs to leave home, and his mother sends him out to Uncle Laban's place in another region. And Laban is his uncle and will soon become his father-in-law, because Jacob will grab one of Laban's daughters. And Jacob will grab more than that. He will grab possessions and everything he can grab hold of. Jacob will grab it. He is the grabber. His life is all about, his life is completely self-serving and self-promoting. And then we come to this text today, and Jacob has reached that point in his life when he, I don't know, it's hard to know exactly what moves him. He feels called to go home. Well, he's got to get away from Laban, his uncle. He's now on the outs with him. He's got to go somewhere, so he decides to go home. And he wants to make up with his brother Esau. He wants to be reconciled to his family. And so he's on his way back to the homeland when we come to this river, the Jabbok. And it's there that Jacob learns that Esau, his brother, is moving toward him with an army. Not good news for Jacob. Esau maybe has not forgotten what Jacob stole from him. And so Jacob on his way home learns that Esau is approaching him with an army of some 400. And so Jacob splits up all of his possessions, and he's got this huge family now. He's got it all. He's got this huge family. He's got, and by the way, when you look at the numbers of children that he has, right away you think of the promise that God made to Abraham, that your descendants will number like the stars in the heaven. And so Jacob is aware of the promise. He's aware of the covenant relationship. He just doesn't acknowledge God very much because Jacob does it on his own. Jacob does it on his own, and he is the grabber. He's the grabber. Something happens to him on this night as he makes his way to the river. He hears about Esau coming to him, and it's all just too much. He realizes what he has become. He realizes what he has done to people. He realizes that his life is a lie, that he is a deceiver, and he is, as much as he has, and he has it all. He has it all. He realizes that he doesn't have what he most longs for, what he most wants and needs in his life. He really wants to make a connection with God. He wants to be right in his spirit. He wants a blessing from God. He wants to be in a different place in his life, in his relationship with his family and the people around him. He doesn't want to live anymore as a conniver and deceiver, as a liar, and someone who is just about self-promotion. Jacob wants for something else. And so that's what's happening on this particular night there at the Jabbok, at the river. He sends his family across the river, and he's left alone. Don't you know that night? We all know that night, don't we? That dark night of the soul. That dark night of the soul when you're left there alone, there's no one else, and you're wrestling with God knows what. When you're wrestling with your guilt or your fear, or your insecurity in life, your emptiness. Jacob is in that dark night of the soul, and he's struggling in his spirit, and he so longs for his life to be different. He so longs to be alive on the inside in a new and different way. That on this particular night, that's what that whole wrestling match with this, first it's a man, and then we realize that and different scholars will say it's a man or it's an angel. At the end of the day, we realize it's God. That's who we're always wrestling with. When we're wrestling within ourselves, when we are wrestling within ourselves about something, in that place of darkness, that place of fear, that place of longing for our lives to be different, longing for a blessing, God's already there with us in those places. Jacob discovers that on the shores of the Jabbok. God's right there with him in the darkness. God is wrestling with Jacob as Jacob longs for self-improvement, as he longs for his life to be different, his relationships with those he loves to be different, as he longs to make a connection with God. And I realized that's where we want to be over the pledge card. When the pledge card is mailed to you in your home, or it comes to, or you find it in the pew over the next couple of weeks, I realized that what Jacob is struggling with, this moment of intense interaction with God, something that he has avoided in his life because he's always been able to get it done. He's always been able to do it himself. He's aware of God's presence, but there's never been any meaningful prayer or conversation with God, very little in the way of interaction. And this is a moment of intense interaction. And what I long for us, as we sit over that pledge card, is not just to fill it out and put in the same old safe number that represents some token offering of what we can do comfortably after we have everything else we want. what I realized is I want us to be able to take that moment. And this is something that Carol and I do every year. This is something that even when our kids were more at home with us, this was something we wrestled with together as a family, is the pledge card. Because we knew it symbolized something. We could either stay where we were yesterday, or we could choose a new beginning. We could choose to perhaps even be more faithful, to trust God more in our lives, to move to a different place in our relationship with God and with each other. And that's what we've learned over the past 28 years. Longer than that. Carol and I have been married for 33 years. We were tithing back when we were in seminary, back when we were eating peanut butter and jelly. Every day, peanut butter and jelly. When I was in seminary for 3 years in Chicago, we tithed every penny we received. If you sent us a check for $220, went to the plate. And that's the way we've lived our lives for the past 28 years. And I don't tell you that to say, look at me. I tell you that because I want you to understand that I believe in what I'm preaching. I believe in the power of God's grace. I believe that what Jacob found that night as he longed for a new beginning, a transformation within himself and with those he loved, Jacob understood finally that he had to stop pretending. He needed a moment with God where he was going to be real and honest. No more pretending. No more playing it safe. No more self-promotion and self-motivation. Now it was going to be about a relationship that was greater than that. Something more. Something that would stir him up in his spirit and awaken him to a whole new perspective on life, a whole new way of being alive. Pledge card doesn't look like much. It's just a little card. It holds all of eternity. It holds all of eternity for your family for the coming year. In that moment when you are wrestling with God, I pray that you will long for the same things that Jacob longed for, a deeper and more meaningful communion with God. I pray that you will long to move to a new place in your life in this church. I pray that you will be emboldened to want to empower this church to realize its potential at every turn, in all of its ministries, in every expression of love in this place, at every turn, at every corner in this place. And it only happens when every family, every household, every person of faith steps up and does the faithful thing. But you aren't wrestling with the church, and you certainly aren't wrestling with me. You won't hear much more from me on this until next year. You need to wrestle with God. You need to wrestle with God about it. And my promise to you is that if you wrestle openly and honestly and stop pretending, inasmuch as money holds us so tightly in this culture, the way money drives us, the way it is a symbol of our fear and our doubts and our insecurities, when you fill out that pledge card, you have the power to be set free, to choose a whole new way of life for you and your family, and to move to a new place of communion with God and to a new place of empowering God's church to realize its potential. Stop playing it safe. Let's be emboldened. Emboldened to come to life. May God quicken our spirits individually and corporately in this great church in the coming year. Amen.